Welcome to True Echo, where hidden truths, buried histories, and the quiet heroes among us finally take center stage. Here we dive deep into real and inspired stories that reveal the unseen battles behind the headlines, stories of injustice, resilience, and redemption. If you believe the past echoes into the present and that courage can still change the future, you're in the right place. This is your echo. This is our story. The Jefferson County Courthouse buzzed with restless energy as the heavy oak doors swung open, revealing a frail figure stepping through. Elijah Carter, dressed in his best, slightly oversized suit, clutched a battered leather briefcase to his chest as though it carried the weight of his ancestors. In many ways it did. Inside were deeds, letters, faded photographs, the last threads tying his family to the 3 acres they had held since emancipation. Judge Theodore Harlan presided over courtroom 305 like a king atop a crumbling empire. With his silver hair gleaming under fluorescent lights and his robes immaculately pressed, he exuded an air of untouchable authority. As Elijah shuffled toward the plaintiff's table, Harlan's gaze flicked over him with thinly veiled disdain, as though he were merely another obstacle in the path of progress. The defense attorneys from Brightwell Development smirked among themselves. Crisp suits, shiny watches, and an army of legal assistants at their backs, they represented power, influence, and the future Elijah stood stubbornly in the way of. They barely concealed their amusement as Elijah struggled to lay out his evidence. The original deed from 1867 granting Moses Carter, Elijah's great-grandfather, the land after emancipation. "Mr. Carter," Harlan interrupted smoothly, "this court is not interested in tales of reconstruction. Do you have a current legal claim that meets modern standards?" Elijah's hand trembled as he raised a yellowed document. "This is the original grant, Your Honor. The land has been passed down." "Anecdotal," Harlan snapped. "Objection sustained." The gallery's laughter sliced through Elijah like a blade. Tears welled in his eyes as he tried again, showing photographs of the family cemetery where generations rested under hand-carved stones. "History can be relocated," Harlan said with a scoff. "Progress cannot be delayed." The gavel fell like a hammer against Elijah's heart. The court ruled in favor of Brightwell Development. The injunction protecting Elijah's land dissolved. The property, the graves, the memories, all were now cleared for demolition. As security moved to usher Elijah out, the doors to the courtroom swung open once more. In walked a woman whose very presence shifted the atmosphere like a crack of lightning on a dry plain. Amara Langston, black suit, natural twist of hair, folder in hand, strode forward with the certainty of a storm long overdue. "Judge Harlan," she called out, voice cutting across the room, "we need to talk." Harlan's smirk faltered for the first time that day. She handed a sealed motion to the clerk. "Emergency injunction. Based on newly uncovered evidence of judicial misconduct." A ripple of whispers tore through the gallery. Harlan tried to bang his gavel, but the sound barely rose above the growing murmurs. Amara turned to the stunned crowd. "This court, this judge, this entire system, has been built on decades of theft, fraud, and buried lives. And today that story changes." Elijah stared at her, barely able to comprehend what was happening. Somewhere deep inside, a tiny ember he had long thought extinguished flickered back to life. Hope. The marble corridors of Jefferson County Courthouse, once deaf to the cries of injustice, now throbbed with the sound of history cracking open. Elijah Carter stood frozen as Amara Langston took command of the room. The Brightwell attorneys whispered furiously among themselves. Judge Harlan's normally impassive face twitched ever so slightly. "Ms. Langston, you are out of order," Harlan barked, his voice quivering on the edge of panic. "No, you are out of order, Your Honor," Amara replied, her words slicing through the tense air. "For 30 years, you have manipulated the law to rob families like the Carters. Today the reckoning begins." Before the gavel could strike again, the clerk, trembling, accepted Amara's thick envelope. It bore the bold heading, "Carter vs. Harlan, 1987. Beneath it, other names were scrawled, victims whose fates had been decided behind closed doors, with secret meetings and untraceable payments. Elijah's knees weakened as he realized what the folder implied. It wasn't just his land. It wasn't just his case. This corruption had deep roots, sprawling across generations like a poisonous vine. Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then with the steady insistence of a world washing itself clean. Protesters gathered under umbrellas, their signs bobbing like small islands in the rising storm. Black land matters. Justice delayed is justice denied. Inside, Harlan ordered a recess, but the court reporters, the cameras, the eyes of the nation were already locked in. He could not escape what was coming. Amara moved toward Elijah, her expression softening. "Mr. Carter," she said quietly, "I know this is overwhelming, but we have evidence now. Real evidence. Suppressed deeds, financial records tying Brightwell to your judge who has direct financial interest in seeing your family erased." Elijah struggled to find words. "How? How do you know all this?" A small, almost secret smile touched Amara's lips. "Because 30 years ago you saved a little girl from a burning house. You didn't know her name. You didn't know you were shaping the future." Her hand brushed the scar hidden near her hairline, a scar Elijah remembered seeing just before the ceiling collapsed that night so long ago. "It was you," he whispered. Amara nodded. "And I never forgot." In that moment, Elijah felt the invisible threads of his life, the sacrifices of his father Harold, the teachings of his grandfather Joseph, the dreams of his wife Ruby, weaving into something larger than loss. Something unstoppable. He straightened his spine. "Then let's finish what they started." A sudden commotion drew their attention. Reporters had spotted the arrival of several lawyers from the Southern Justice Coalition. This wasn't just one case anymore. It was becoming a movement. In the chambers above, Judge Harlan retreated to his private study, pouring bourbon into a trembling glass. Old photographs, himself as a young man shaking hands with senators, ribbon-cutting ceremonies with developers, stared back from the walls. His world, meticulously built on silent suffering and carefully edited histories, was crumbling. He picked up the phone. "Garrett," he rasped into the receiver. "She's here. She knows everything." On the other end, Garrett Brightwell, CEO of the sprawling empire that had fed for decades on stolen land, swore under his breath. "Handle it, Ted. If you go down, we all go down." Harlan set the receiver down with a hollow thud. Outside, the thunder rumbled closer. The storm was here. The rain hammered down as Amara Langston paced outside the courthouse steps, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. Inside the heavy old building, Elijah Carter sat in the empty courtroom, clutching the photographs of his ancestors as though anchoring himself to their strength. "We move forward," Amara said firmly into the phone, speaking to a network of allies she had quietly assembled over the past few years, investigative journalists, honest clerks, archivists. "We file the emergency injunction tonight. No delays." At that very moment, inside Judge Harlan's private chambers, another conversation unfolded, one far darker. Garrett Brightwell leaned against the paneled wall, dripping rainwater onto the expensive carpet. His jaw was tight, his eyes cold. "You promised control, Ted," Garrett sneered. "You promised no loose ends." Harlan, for the first time in decades, looked small. His hands trembled slightly as he refilled his glass. "I had control. I didn't know she survived. You should have made sure." Brightwell's voice was a quiet threat. There was a long silence, broken only by the soft clinking of ice in Harlan's glass. "They're digging, Garrett," Harlan muttered. "Deeper than I ever thought possible. Then it's time we bury them before they dig us up." Brightwell leaned closer. "Handle it, Judge. You know how." Downstairs, Elijah shifted as Amara returned. Her black umbrella dripped onto the courthouse floor as she leaned over the worn oak bench where he sat. "They're scared," she whispered. "We have them cornered." Elijah's eyes, heavy with loss but rekindled with a stubborn spark, searched her face. "What do we do now?" Amara smiled grimly. "Now we give them no place left to run." Meanwhile, across town in a cramped one-bedroom apartment, Micah Reed, a scrappy journalist whose articles had once exposed police corruption in Atlanta, sifted through a mountain of property records. His corkboard was pinned with dozens of red strings connecting land plots, judges, developers, politicians. At the center, glaring like a black sun, was Judge Theodore Harlan's photo. Micah's brow furrowed as he scrolled through scanned documents late into the night. The same patterns repeated again and again: families of color losing land due to sudden competency rulings, manufactured tax liens, lost filings, always followed by a Brightwell development project. "This isn't just Jefferson County," Micah muttered, voice hoarse from hours without rest. "This is a damn machine." He snapped a picture of his board and fired off a text to Amara. "Found proof. It's bigger than we thought. Meeting tomorrow?" She replied almost instantly. "Yes. Bring everything. It's time." As Micah leaned back, rubbing his aching eyes, he didn't notice the small blinking red light underneath his desk, a tracking device hastily planted during a fake maintenance inspection 2 days earlier. His movements, his discoveries, his conversations, all were being monitored. Across town, a pair of men in dark raincoats reviewed the signal on a tablet, noting Micah's exact location. Orders, one muttered. The other, older and scarred from old battles long since forgotten, shrugged. Watch for now. If he gets too close, we move. Back at the courthouse, Judge Harlan made one last desperate call. Not to an ally. Not to Garrett Brightwell. But to an old contact, a fixer known only as Doyle, a ghost from his early prosecutor days when inconvenient witnesses sometimes disappeared quietly before trial. I need a problem handled, Harlan said, voice barely above a whisper. On the other end of the line, Doyle laughed, low and cruel. Same price as always, Judge. Harlan closed his eyes, feeling the crushing inevitability. Do it. By morning, Jefferson County would no longer be the sleepy southern stronghold it had always been. It would become the epicenter of a battle that would ripple across the entire nation. And the first shot had just been fired. The next morning broke with a heavy fog draped over Jefferson County, muffling sounds and cloaking intentions. Inside the battered diner on Willow Creek Road, Elijah Carter nursed a steaming cup of coffee, watching the condensation gather on the window. Across from him sat Isaiah Carter, his grandson, freshly arrived from Atlanta. Isaiah was the embodiment of a future Elijah once feared would never come. Sharp, educated, polished, and angry in a way that made Elijah both proud and concerned. You shouldn't have fought them alone, Grandpa, Isaiah said, his voice tight with restrained fury. Elijah shook his head slowly. Had to. Some fights. You don't wait to be ready. You just stand. Isaiah set a sleek laptop on the table between them, sliding it around to face Elijah. A web of documents, scanned deeds, financial transactions, and property maps filled the screen. You're not standing alone anymore. At another booth across the diner, Amara Langston reviewed notes with Micah Reed. The tension in the air was palpable. They were gathering, the old blood and the new, weaving a coalition bound by something more powerful than law, truth. We have what we need, Micah whispered, sliding a flash drive across the table to Amara. Proof of systematic land theft, not just here. Across 5 counties. Brightwell's fingerprints are everywhere. Amara's eyes narrowed. And Harlan. Micah nodded grimly. Financial trails, secret meetings, offshore accounts. It's airtight. Amara pocketed the flash drive carefully. Good. Because by tonight we're filing in federal court. Meanwhile, not far away, Judge Theodore Harlan watched from his study window, his bourbon glass untouched. His face was pale, drawn tight with tension. He had seen the gathering at the diner. His men, the ones Brightwell had loaned him, reported every movement. They're making their move, said Doyle, emerging from the study shadows. Then stop them, Harlan hissed, fear cracking his voice. Doyle smirked. There's an easier way. If Carter were to suddenly disappear, so would the case. Harlan turned from the window, the weight of his sins aging him visibly. No, he said hoarsely. Not him. Doyle laughed. A cold, hollow sound. You don't get to have a conscience now, Judge. Harlan collapsed into his chair. He was trapped. The machine he had helped build now demanded blood to keep running. At noon, Elijah, Isaiah, Amara, and Micah gathered at Amara's small downtown office. Maps covered the walls, photographs pinned like battle plans. The team moved like soldiers before a siege, checking evidence, reviewing motions, plotting every step. Once we file the injunction, Amara said, pointing to a highlighted timeline, we trigger immediate discovery. That forces Harlan's financials into evidence. Brightwell can't contain it once it's public. And the media? Isaiah asked. Micah grinned. Ready. Front page exclusives locked in with the Post and the Tribune. Once this breaks, they can't cover it up. Elijah stood, staring at a faded photograph of his great-grandfather Moses Carter, a man born in chains who died free, only to have his descendants shackled by lies instead of iron. This ain't just for us, Elijah said, voice low but carrying. This is for all of them. Before anyone could respond, a loud crash shattered the moment. The office window exploded inward, a brick crashing through and skidding across the floor. Attached to it was a note scrawled in angry red ink. Drop it or die. The room froze. Heartbeats thundered in ears. Micah rushed to the window, peering into the swirling fog outside, but the street was empty, a ghost town. Isaiah picked up the brick with gloved hands, reading the note aloud again. This isn't just a threat, Amara said grimly. It's a declaration. They're desperate. And desperate men are dangerous, Elijah added, his voice heavy with the knowledge of hard years and harder men. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Elijah reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper, The original deed from 1867, yellowed, fragile, but unbroken. He placed it on the table. "Let him come," he said quietly. "This land was bought once with sweat and blood. If it has to be paid for again, then so be it." Amara locked eyes with him, a surge of fierce respect passing between them. "We won't let them take it," she vowed. Micah and Isaiah nodded, their faces grim. Outside the rain had stopped. But the true storm had only just begun. Night settled over Jefferson County like a heavy, smothering blanket. In Amara Langston's office, the light from a single desk lamp cast long shadows over the maps and legal documents spread out like a battlefield command center. The team worked silently, tension threading the air as thick as the coming showdown. Amara tapped furiously at her laptop, preparing the emergency federal injunction. Micah sifted through last-minute corroborating evidence, cross-referencing land seizures with Harlan's financial ties. Isaiah updated the encrypted database, watching the slow progress bar with the focus of a man who knew their window for action was closing fast. Elijah Carter sat a little apart, the worn deed to his family's land spread before him. His eyes were sharp despite the deep lines carved by a lifetime of struggle. He was a man who had lost much but was prepared at last to lose no more. "We file at dawn," Amara said finally, her voice steeled with resolve. "Once it's entered into the federal docket, it's public record. They can't suppress it." "And if they try?" Isaiah asked. Amara smiled grimly. "Then they'll be fighting a fire with gasoline." Just then, Micah's phone vibrated violently across the table. A text message, unknown number. "They're coming. Get out." Micah's eyes widened. "We have to move. Now." In the distance, the low growl of engines grew louder. Headlights swung into view, cutting through the dark like searchlights. 3 black SUVs barreled down the street, screeching to a halt outside the office building. Amara snapped her laptop shut. "Go, go, go." They scattered, grabbing essentials. Evidence drives, documents, the critical file folders. Elijah clutched the leather briefcase to his chest like a lifeline. Downstairs, boots pounded on the concrete steps. The lock rattled. Micah led them through the back exit into the narrow alley. Rain-slicked bricks gleamed under a single flickering streetlight. "This way," Isaiah hissed, pulling Elijah toward a side street where an old sedan was parked, engine running. A contact of Amara's, a former civil rights lawyer who had turned full-time investigator, leaned out the driver's window. "Hurry." Behind them, the building door splintered inward. Shadows spilled into the alley. Micah ducked low, hustling Amara ahead of him. He caught a glimpse of one of the men through the alley's smoke. Dark clothes, heavy boots, radios crackling at their hips. Not police. Not official. Muscle for hire. The sedan peeled out just as a figure in the alley raised something metallic. Micah ducked instinctively. A burst of sparks exploded behind them as a taser bolt missed and hit a trash can instead. "They want us alive," Amara said grimly, slamming the door locked down. "They want leverage." Elijah said nothing. He only tightened his grip on the briefcase. The city blurred past them. Empty streets, shuttered shops, glowing neon signs flickering in the mist. When they finally pulled into a hidden parking garage under a battered motel on the edge of town, everyone exhaled at once. "Temporary safe house," the driver muttered, tossing a key toward Amara. "Room 306. You've got 8 hours before sunrise. After that, you're on your own." Upstairs, the room was small, stale-smelling, but safe. Elijah sat heavily on one bed, the briefcase beside him. Isaiah sat on the floor cross-legged, phone in hand, tracking news and social media. "They're trying to control the narrative already," he muttered, holding up a feed. "Fake reports about us being radicals, trying to disrupt economic development." Micah laughed bitterly. "Same playbook. Paint justice fighters as criminals. Smear the truth before it can breathe." Amara didn't react. She was already plugging her laptop into a battered wall socket, booting it up. She inserted the flash drive Micah had given her, the culmination of months of quiet investigation. The files loaded slowly, but one folder in particular made her breath catch. "What's that?" Isaiah asked, moving closer. Amara clicked it open. Inside were scanned deeds, but not just Elijah's land, hundreds of properties. Across Jefferson, across neighboring counties. Each file linked not only to Harlan's rulings but to a network of judges, clerks, and corporate frontmen stretching back decades. "It's bigger than just Brightwell," Amara whispered. "This is a system. A machine that devoured black landowners one family at a time, over generations." Micah swore under his breath. "They built wealth off the backs of stolen dreams. They built America, Elijah corrected quietly. And they did it by making sure men like Moses Carter stayed invisible. A heavy silence fell over the room. Then Amara stood, face blazing with a resolve that was almost holy. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice low and fierce, "we bury their machine." Isaiah stood too. "We're with you." Micah nodded, clenching his fists. "All the way." Elijah slowly rose to his feet, the old briefcase in his hands, holding it out to Amara. "In here," he said, "are the last words of my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather. Promises made when they could barely write their own names." He looked around at them all, young and old, bound by something stronger than blood. "Make them count." Outside, the night thickened. Somewhere in the city, powerful men plotted desperate countermeasures. But in that dingy motel room, a new kind of storm was gathering strength. A storm that would not be stopped. The first thin light of dawn spilled across the city as Amara Langston stood at the edge of the Jefferson County Federal Courthouse steps, clutching a thick binder of legal motions. Behind her, Elijah, Isaiah, and Micah formed a silent line of support. The courthouse, once a symbol of defeat, now loomed as a battlefield. One way or another, today would be historic. Amara took a breath, feeling the weight of generations on her shoulders. In her mind, she heard the faint echo of Elijah's words from the night before, "Make them count." As they stepped inside, the federal clerk behind the glass window looked up, tired, suspicious. But when Amara slid the emergency injunction across the counter, complete with hundreds of pages of evidence, something changed in his expression. "You're filing against Judge Harlan himself?" he asked, voice hushed. Amara nodded. "And Brightwell Development. And anyone else who profited from stolen land." The clerk blinked. For a moment it seemed like he might refuse. But then he stamped the packet, entered it into the system and slid back the receipt. It was official. The case was live. Word traveled fast. By the time they stepped back onto the courthouse steps, cameras were already assembling. Reporters jostled for position, microphones thrust forward. "Miss Langston, are you accusing Judge Harlan of criminal conspiracy? Will this affect the Brightwell construction projects? Mr. Carter, do you have anything to say to the families who lost their land?" Elijah stepped forward. His hands were steady. His voice, though raspy with age, carried like a bell through the chaos. "I stand here today," he said, "for every man and woman who ever bled for a piece of earth only to have it stolen with a pen instead of a gun." The crowd stilled. "We were written out of history," Elijah continued, his eyes sweeping the sea of cameras. "But today, we write ourselves back in." Cheers broke out, spontaneous, raw, overwhelming. Inside the courthouse, Judge Harlan watched it unfold on the small TV in his chambers. His face, once carved in stone, now sagged with defeat. The federal marshals waited just outside his door. He knew they were there. He had heard their boots hours ago. His hand trembled as he signed the last document of his judicial career, a formal resignation letter. But it wouldn't save him. Minutes later, the marshals entered. Without ceremony, without mercy, they placed him under arrest for conspiracy against civil rights, judicial fraud, and obstruction of justice. As they led him past the stunned courthouse staff, Harlan's gaze met Amara's briefly through the front windows. There was no hate there. Only a hollow, broken man who finally realized the system he had thought invincible was nothing but sand beneath a rising tide. Micah watched silently, camera in hand, capturing every second for a documentary he already knew would rock the nation. "This is bigger than Jefferson County," he whispered to Amara. She nodded. It always was. Later that afternoon, a press conference erupted on the courthouse lawn. Amara stood before the sea of microphones, flanked by Elijah, Isaiah, Camille Rivers, the brave public defender who had leaked surveillance footage, and even Sarah Wilson, Judge Harlan's own estranged daughter. Sarah stepped forward first. She wore no makeup, no prepared statement. Just raw truth. "My father believed in two systems of justice," she said. "One for people who looked like him. Another for people who looked like me." The crowd rippled with shock. "I stand here today to say, no more. No more hidden histories. No more silent thefts." Tears slid down her face, but her voice never wavered. Micah moved through the crowd, capturing faces, black, white, old, young, all drawn by the gravity of something undeniable, the first crack in a wall that had stood for over a century. Back at Elijah's land, Isaiah erected new survey markers. But these were different. Instead of the cheap plastic flags Brightwell's crews had used, Isaiah planted hand-carved wooden stakes, each bearing the names of their ancestors: Moses, Joseph, Harold, Ruby. Sarah. This time, Isaiah said, hammering the last stake into the red earth, they're not just claiming the land. They're claiming us. Amara stood with Elijah at the crest of the old hill, overlooking the field. You changed the world today, she said quietly. Elijah shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. No, child. We remembered the world. The one they tried to erase. Far below, the crowd was still growing. Activists, historians, families who had long believed themselves powerless, all drawn by the simple truth that once justice finds a voice, it does not go silent again. The sun began to set over Jefferson County, casting long shadows across the land Elijah Carter's family had refused to abandon. But this time the shadows did not bring fear. They brought memory. They brought hope. And they promised that the past would no longer be hidden. Night draped itself over Jefferson County, but this time it carried no sorrow. It carried the low murmur of voices lingering long after the cameras were packed away, the way people linger when they know they have witnessed history being rewritten. Inside a newly erected white tent on Elijah Carter's property, hundreds gathered for a vigil, candles flickering in the warm night air, faces lit from below, shadows dancing across the field where 6 generations of Carters had lived and died. At the front of the gathering, Amara Langston stood quietly beside Elijah, Isaiah, Micah, Sarah Wilson, and Camille Rivers. None of them spoke for several long minutes. There was power in the silence, a deep, aching power that carried the weight of every stolen acre, every buried injustice. Then Elijah stepped forward, the microphone crackling slightly in the still air. He didn't hold notes. He didn't need them. My great-grandfather Moses was born property, Elijah said, voice clear and low. After emancipation he was given a few acres, a mule, and a promise that the land he worked would be his legacy. He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd, lingering on the children sitting cross-legged in the front rows. For a time it was true. Then came the new chains, paper chains. Lies called deeds. Judgments passed in courthouses where justice was just another commodity for sale. He gripped the wooden podium tighter. They tried to steal our roots thinking we would wither. But what they forgot, Elijah's voice grew stronger, what they forgot is that we were planted too deep. The crowd stirred, murmurs of affirmation rising like a tide. We survived the auction blocks. We survived the burning crosses. We survived the empty promises. And tonight we stand here not just to reclaim our land, but to reclaim our name. He held up the deed, the fragile, weathered parchment fluttering in the soft breeze. This, Elijah said, isn't just paper. It's a covenant. Between the ones who built this land with their bare hands, and the ones who will inherit it. Cheers erupted, hands raised, tears wiped away without shame. Isaiah stepped forward, laying a hand on his grandfather's shoulder. I'm here because my grandfather never stopped believing this fight was worth it, Isaiah said, voice catching slightly. He taught me that we don't walk away from our history. We walk through it. We carry it forward. Micah Reed filmed every second, knowing that tonight would be the closing scene of his documentary, a story of loss, betrayal, and impossible triumph. In the crowd, Sarah Wilson watched quietly, tears slipping down her cheeks. For so long she had been ashamed of her bloodline, of the secrets that rotted behind her father's smile. But tonight she understood something deeper. She wasn't just a daughter of Judge Harland. She was the daughter of every woman who had kept going when history tried to erase them. As the candles flickered against the night sky, Amara Langston stood a little apart, hand resting on the oak sapling Elijah had planted months before. Its leaves shivered in the breeze, small, green, but tenacious. Like them. Nearby, Camille Rivers reviewed a list of names. Defendants wrongfully convicted, families who had lost land through rigged court rulings. She wasn't waiting for some future hero to fix the system. She was the system now, and she intended to tear down the walls from the inside out. Beyond the vigil, news outlets around the nation blazed with headlines. Historic land theft case triggers national movement. Judge Harland convicted, a century of injustice unraveled. The Carters win, but their fight ignites a larger reckoning. In Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and beyond, other families had begun stepping forward. Other graves were being uncovered. Other stories were being told. The Carter case had become a beacon. As the vigil ended and people dispersed slowly into the night, Elijah sat once again on his porch, the weight of years slipping gently from his shoulders. The stars blazed overhead, unbothered by human failures or victories. But here, on this piece of land fought for with generations of hope, one truth burned as bright as any star. They had tried to erase him. Instead they made him immortal. He closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of earth, rain, and freedom. Beside him, Isaiah unfolded an old map, newly updated, with dozens of small flags marking lands being reclaimed across the south. "We're just getting started," Isaiah said softly. Elijah chuckled, a low, rich sound full of peace. "Good," he said, "because the world finally decided to listen." And under the vast, endless sky, the land sang back its answer, a song of roots too deep to be torn, names too strong to be forgotten, and justice too long denied to ever be delayed again. The fight was far from over. But this time the warriors were ready. And this time, they would not be moved. In a world where history is often written by those in power, one man's unwavering fight became the catalyst for exposing a system built on silence and injustice. Elijah Carter's story reminds us that even after generations of being erased, the truth can still find its voice, and when it does, it echoes louder than any lie. As Elijah said, "They tried to erase us. Instead, they made us immortal." If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, stand with us. Subscribe to True Echo, share this story with those who need hope, and leave a comment telling us what hidden injustices in your own community still need to be uncovered. Together we can make sure the echoes of truth never fade.